Just want to do a quick screencast here on the Japanese involvement in World War II, and in particular their involvement with Pearl Harbor and the U.S. reaction. What we've got here is a quote at the beginning about who is really to blame for World War II and who was the major aggressor. Well, it is true the Germans killed 6 million Jews and 20 million Russians, but the Japanese slaughtered as many as 30 million Filipinos, Malays, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Indonesians, and Burmese, and at least 23 million of them ethnic Chinese. Both nations looted, though the Japanese plundered more over a longer period than the Nazis. Both conquerors enslaved millions and exploited them as forced laborers, and in the case of the Japanese, as forced prostitutes for frontline troops. If you were a Nazi prisoner of war from Britain, America, Australia, New Zealand, or Canada, but not the Soviet Union, you faced a 4% chance of not surviving the war. By comparison, the death rate for Allied POWs held by the Japanese was nearly 30%. This is just to make the point that they were as devastating an enemy as the Germans, even though we don't really talk about them a lot necessarily in a traditional class on World War II. If you look here, we've got a map of the world just to get an idea of where Japan is right over here. You get an idea of where Russia is right here, China and Australia, and then, of course, Europe and the United States. And looking how far away Japan is, literally on the other side of the globe from the United States. Here we've got Europe at the height of Nazi expansion, which is right at the time where Pearl Harbor is going to happen. You can see the blue areas represent Nazi-controlled territory. You can see them way over here, occupied slightly by the Nazis, controlled by the Nazis, all this in blue. Spain and Portugal being neutral, Switzerland being neutral. You got the United Kingdom and Iceland free, and then Syria free as well. But it just gives you the point that by late 1941, the Nazis are in complete charge in Europe, not a lot opposing them. And the U.S. is still not involved. Now let's explore militarism in World War II with Japan and U.S. involvement. World War I, going back a little bit, Japan was on the side of the West. They weren't an enemy of France and Great Britain. They were an ally of France and Great Britain. After World War I, they had an economic boom and their heavy industry grew. They also sold munitions and goods to the West. Again, the point being made here is that they are Western allies. After World War I, they form a constitutional democracy. They join the League of Nations, the Western Alliance. They are less expansionist. They trade for resources, meaning they're not conquering other nations at this time. They are trading to get the supplies that they need as a nation. As the Depression hits, it also hits Japan, and it leads to a military takeover of the Japanese government. This worldwide economic depression hits them hard. They are no longer able to trade for resources. Remember, they're an island. They don't have a lot of land or resources. If they can't trade for them, they might be willing to take them. The nationalists then turn to their military to preserve traditional Japanese values and eliminate any of the Western influences. The idea being here, the constitutional Western-style democracy will be gone. Western-style culture will be gone. The Japanese are going to turn back the clock to the past and their samurai culture and values. Their first target is Manchuria, which is northern China, and then China itself. They take Manchuria, they claim, for protection from China, but it also provides them with resources, in particular iron and oil, some oil. By 1937, they've invaded eastern China, and they treat the Chinese ruthlessly, and they commit many atrocities. We've got some images here from the rape of Nanjing or Nanking, where lots of civilians were killed and Chinese women were raped by Japanese troops. They were particularly brutal to the Chinese. During World War II, the Japanese, are seeking resources. Many of them they had previously received from the United States. They want to create their own empire called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, an economic and political bloc under Japanese control, and they plan on taking resources instead of trading for them. And this red line represents their empire. So you've got the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, part of New Guinea, Japan itself, and the border area of China. All this would be a part of that Japanese empire. And they decide to achieve this to sign an Axis pact with Germany and Italy. So they're basically joining them against the Western powers. The U.S., because they joined Japan and Italy, the U.S. imposed an oil embargo on them, and we would no longer trade oil with them. Japan really saw this as an act of war. In response, they did attack Pearl Harbor, as you saw, and other locations in Southeast Asia. They believed the U.S. would not fight. The reason being, if we declare war on Japan, it would be like declaring war on Germany and Italy as well. And they felt like we would not want to fight a war in both the Atlantic Ocean against the Germans and the Pacific Ocean against the Japanese. However, they were wrong. We did enter the war, declared war after Pearl Harbor, and fought fierce battles with them. The Japanese suffered home front food shortages. They had a hard time sustaining this war effort due to lack of supplies. They also started running out of soldiers. So they trained women and children to defend the island versus U.S. invasion. And they also used famously kamikaze attacks on U.S. ships, suicide missions. You see the kamikazes as you see the Japanese become more desperate because they're running out of fuel, munitions, resources, and to be honest, trained pirates. So as much, or not pirates, pilots. So it's much easier for them to have inexperienced pilots on planes that are heavily loaded with fuel and explosives to just crash into planes rather than have an experienced pilot carry out a mission. We know, as we'll see, that this is going to bring us to the end of war, where we're going to end war with drastic total war efforts, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki leading to their unconditional surrender. This is just an intro to Japanese involvement. We'll see more about Japan in the unit. Thank you.